Namaste and welcome to another episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. I'm your host, Roshan Karyappa. Now, they say politics and policy is downstream from arts, culture, and aesthetics. And on this episode, we'll discuss how some of our cultural mores have been represented in the mainstream arts and how that has evolved. So, joining me today, we have two very special guests. We have Kaushal Inamdar, who is an award winning music composer and singer in Marathi and Hindi movies. He's also a columnist and author and is the founding director of the Marathi Asmita Cultural Foundation. Kaushalji is an outspoken voice on Twitter, not shying away from expressing his opinions on matters of politics and policies. So namaste, Kaushalji. Thanks so much for being here.
Namaste. Thank you for inviting me again. Thanks.
Good to have you. So we also have Nivedita Tiwari, who is a film and television actress. She's worked in several TV serials in leading Indian channels. Nivedita ji also enjoys creative writing, singing, and reading. She's currently a digital journalist as well, bringing out issues of importance, especially concerning the youth. She too is a strong and popular voice on Twitter. So thank you so much for joining us, Nivedita ji.
Namaste, Roshan ji, and namaste, Kaushal ji. It's
Namaste,
pleasure to be
Nivedita.
here. Namaste, audience.
All right, so we have plenty to discuss, and maybe we can begin with you, Kaushalji. How do you see the relation of lived cultural experience versus what is represented, say, in popular movies and literature? And if you could take us through, how that has evolved over the last 2-3 decades.
Yeah. So primarily, I am in music, and I've been working since 25 years. And especially in Marathi, so the popular genre of art, especially cinema, and even in music. So 25 years ago, it used to be a lot more away from reality. It was because after the emergency period, the sort of a feeling of helplessness started setting in the society. So the films sold a lot of dreams. Now, if you see Hindi cinema especially, you see in 60s, you see there was a most of the films were melodramas. Most of the films did not have villains. If they had, then the villain and the hero used to be black and white. The hero was good, the villain was bad. 70s, the advent of 70s saw in the popular phrase the advent of the angry young man. So what happened was, the angry young man was wronged by the society, so went on to a not such a good path. So you had heroes who were robbers, who were thieves, who were gangsters, but they had certain moral code. Okay. And then there were the 90s, where this moral code started getting very hazy. Even though, now you had, for example, in recent films like Singham 2, you had a cop who is corrupt. Then he has an epiphany and then comes back to moral. Especially in these times, and I think we have to point out to the Hollywood films as well, where the protagonist not only treaded on very dubious moral lines, but he was also, or he or she was also very vulnerable emotionally. So you have now heroes or protagonists who are drug addicts, or who are recovering alcoholics, or who have some sort of psychological problem. So this is the major shift in the how the stories are being told in popular culture.
Right.
Right. So now the people who are doing the films right now say that this is more realistic. Okay. It is morose, but it is not always realistic. So if selling dreams and everything is very goody goody and nice and flowery, if that is not the truth, then the other end of the spectrum also should not be the truth, or should be portrayed as this is very realistic. And so there is a middle path where filmmakers were trading in, say, late 70s, early 80s. So people like Rishikesh Mukherjee, Basu Chatterjee, Bhim Sen, Sai Paranspe. So that was a certain middle path that was taking place. So this is the shift that I have seen, and even in music, there is an interesting shift right down to the composition, because see, in 60s we had compositions like तस्वीर तेरी दिल में जिस दिन से उतारी है, फिर तुझे संग लेके नए नए रंग लेके सपनों की महफिल में. So you had one whole, in this sign line of a song, you had 5 different musical phrases. They are all different. With the advent of the 90s, what you saw was, you saw the repetition of phrases. For example, the phrases, musical phrases, went to become smaller. For example, dil hai chota sa. This is such a small phrase. Okay. And then you repeated that phrase. Choti si asha. So da 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 da. So you had small phrases and repetitive. The reason for this was the attention span of the audience grew increasingly very small. And now you are down to hook lines.
Yeah.
So you see any Hindi or Marathi or any regional songs also, you are down to hook lines. So it, because the attention span just froze down to the minimal. So you have songs in Marathi, we have songs like Mauli, 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 Rupa Tuse, or a song that I have done, Parvartigar, Parvartigar, Parvar. So it down to one word hook line, because people did not trust. If it didn't matter whether the song is good or bad, it mattered whether the song is uh, immediately hooked onto, whether we remember it. Right, it's easy to remember, and that's all people remember, the hook. So there was no space for songs like "हाँ, वो चुप रहे तो मेरे दिल के दाग जलते हैं." So long phrases disappeared. One more thing disappeared: sad songs disappeared, and songs of angst came in. So you see, मेरा सुंदर सपना बीत गया. Now nobody has the time to dwell on a tragedy for such a long time. So this lower, the songs which began lower octave, which were essentially talking to oneself, they disappeared, and songs of angst, so they all went to the upper octaves. For example, तन्हाई. So this went on to the upper octave. और तड़प तड़प के इस दिल से आह निकलती रही, ना 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 ना, ऐसा क्या गुनाह किया. So it went on to the upper octaves. Now everybody is shouting. See, this changes of this also meant what type of voice culture would be expected. You see the voice culture of Rahat Fateh Ali Khan or Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, or people who are singing essentially in upper octaves or in high pitched voices. The song started catering to those type of voices. So angst replaced sadness or even some kind of pensiveness. So that was a major change that I have been seeing in that. It changed the whole composition aspect of a song.
Right. And why do you think it skews one way or another? I mean, I've actually, I think it's sort of a chicken egg situation, right? Because I mean, it's a bit of a puzzle to me as well as to, how people can listen to 2.5 hour, 3 hour podcasts, on very, very complicated issues. But at the same
Yes.
time, they enjoy, the hook and punchline driven sort of is it a subject of medium, or is it, what would you attribute that to?
See, there are 2 or 3 reasons, because it's essentially a complicated thing. First, in the first part of, say, especially in the 80s to 90s, the music companies decided what kind of music you would listen to. So the advent of music, and music became affordable for all classes of in society. Okay. So now what happens is, when you are listening to a podcast of 2 hours, you require certain type of attention. In music, that attention was somehow music was stripped off from the need for attention. So it became increasingly rhythm heavy music, and it the this is one more thing that I have observed. Science or technology uh, moves from essentially big things to small to nano sort of things. In music, the exactly the opposite happened. So we lost the sense of complexities. There is very little chance of a Madan Mohan or a Roshan being uh, very successful in these times, because music traveled in the opposite. Producers started asking of us that make simple phrases, make easy, everybody should be able to sing. Actually, it also happened because the, there were no music sensitive producers either in the music business or in the film business, or very less people. So now there are, but that shift of taste in music has already happened. Now, to our podcast, you will demand some sort of attention in that, and people are listening to them. But the same thing doesn't happen even in classical music. The classical music concerts from 2.5 hours, one artist singing for 2 hours has now shrinked into 3 artists sharing the stage for 40-45 minutes. So it's happened with times. This is what is to be observed.
Right. Right. So, Nivedita ji, one of the major disruptions we've seen in recent times has been the advent of OTT platforms, right? And we, mildly touched upon it earlier as well. The medium could be a constraint for the art itself, right? And one of the things that OTT platforms have impacted is the kind of stories itself that are being told on screen. So, what do you think, has changed, and how is this impact? How do you see this impact?
Let's talk about both the positive and the negative impact. So, with the advent of the OTT platforms, there was a kind of democratization which also happened. The artists who were not getting work earlier in, say, in mainstream cinema, started getting work. The storytellers who wanted to tell their stories, but they would not get to reach the audience, they started getting that kind of audience and that platform. So, that was one thing. But we have to look at the medium itself now. The medium itself, with the access to data now, the kind of access to data that people have, and the abundance of content that have, because of there is the abundance of content on OTT platforms, people expect expect that they're on the move and they want to watch content on the move. So that impacts both their attention span as well as the kind of stories that are being told. Now, if we look at there's rise in use of handsets, right? People want to watch content on on their phones, right, or on their laptops. Primarily, OTT platforms are the streaming happens there, right? So if you physically look at that space, it's a very private space. It's it's a small space. I'm sitting in front of my laptop and watching something. There's no one around. I mean, I could be watching it with my friends or family, but that's not. On my phone, it's a very confined space. So therefore, I think that impacts the kind of content that comes, because it's not, there may be kind of content which I would not watch sitting in front of in a big living room, sitting in front of a television watching something with my family. So then the content became provocative, it became titillating, it became radical, and sometimes thought-provoking as well. So I think that is the shift that happened in the kind of stories that are being told now because of the advent of OTT platforms. The other thing that you see is the kind of representation that happens of certain regions in the country. Right. Now, I think they picked it from the West, this whole, telling about small towns and stories about small towns, right? So what happens in the West, or if you look at these Scandinavian noirs, right? It's a small town with a very small population. Everyone knows everyone. There's a bar, there is a pub where people go and meet. And the whole premise is that there are dark secrets where people know each other's secrets and there are secrets hiding, right? Now, lock, stock, and barrel, you cannot take that premise and put it in Indian smaller towns, but that is what is happening. If you look at those stories, like, whether American small towns, upward mobility is, people want to go to these urban spaces, these cities, these smaller towns are hollow, there is nothing to do. So there are people who go in the evenings, they'll have a beer, and it's very dark, right? And there's depression, there is crime, a lot of crime. So now that is being shown as the reality of smaller, Indian towns. So I'm not saying that crime doesn't happen in small towns, but that is not the only truth. That is not the only reality. It's a 5,000-year-old civilization at the very least, right? Indian small towns are centers of activity. Yes, moving to urban centers is considered, of that upward mobility, that's aspirational. But at the same time, it's not that people in smaller towns have nothing to do. So you cannot, what happens in an American small town does not necessarily happen in a Indian small town. The family structure is still intact, the social structure is still intact, there is a high spiritual quotient, and people are guided by that. So you don't have that kind of hollowness. Now, if you depict that and show that to be the reality, I think that's problematic. And that is one thing I see that has been happening with the advent of OTT platforms.
Right. But it's also subject to the fact that drama requires certain tension, right? I mean, you can't really focus on, let's say, the mundane. You can't focus on the what is obviously good aspects of certain things. You have to sort of show that show the I won't say the negative side, but you also have to show the other side of things as well.
Okay, so I think here we need to discuss something which is something very fundamental, and I would say the whole idea of creativity and art and how it is understood in the Indian tradition, and I think that's very, very important. So yes, art, drama, literature, music, it mirrors society. There has to be a freedom to depict all kind of reality. But at the same time, at least in the Indian tradition, the concept of auchitya and prayojan, appropriateness, is also very, very important. And I think appropriateness or propriety is a very, I would say, it's not the term auchitya does not actually you will not be able to define that correctly, but it's translated, right? But auchitya is very, very important in this. And for example, in case of, say, let's take poetry. If the kind of metaphor that you use, it's too bizarre, people will not accept it. So it reduces the quality of the kavya, right? So auchitya is very, very important, and it defines the society is based on that. And if we say that art mirrors society, then the same kind of auchitya also should be guiding drama or art. So while there is, on one hand, you have the freedom to create whatever you want, every work of art also has, I would say, inbuilt limitation. And a work of art which has integrity, or an artist who has an integrity, a dramatist, a cinematographer, a director, a poet, a writer, they would respect that inbuilt boundaries. You cannot cross it.
Right. Okay. Uh, Kaushalji, now this moving away from the Delhi, Bombay metro stereotypes, right? The cultural stereotypes as such. How has that affected the music? I would assume that, I mean, a lot more folk and a lot more those elements would have come into the music, right?
Yes, what has happened is actually it's increasingly moved, the national scenario has increasingly moved towards central India. So you have a lot of folk music from UP, Bihar, coming into mainstream Hindi cinema, which is, I think, good, because at one time it was dominated only by Punjabi music, and a lot of Sufi music like qawwalis, and even now you see a lot of out of place qawwalis in films. That there is no actually reason for that, but that is also because s- the Indian tradition of telling story in a song
Hmm.
increasingly, the filmmakers lost the significance of telling a story in the song. uh, People say that India is a uh, country of rivers and mountains. Some say it's a land of tigers and snakes, and some will say it's a land of diversity, and we have a lot of unity in that diversity. But if you ask me, India is a land of stories and songs, and to tell a story in a song is our national character.
Hmm.
It's not by it's not a coincidence that the highest philosophical treatise of this land is called the Bhagavad Gita. It's not a coincidence. It's even mathematics we have taught through poetry and music. So
Yeah.
we see it as poet. Even the playwrights, Kalidas or Bhas, they were called poets. They were not called literateurs or dramatists or anything. They were called poets. Ved Vyas is a poet. Mahabharat is in poetry. So we tend to tell our stories in a song. Secondly, the type of story that we are telling is not a linear story like one begins at once upon a time and then ends at and they lived happily ever after. We move around in circles, and avartan is our soul of our storytelling.
Hmm.
So you see Panchatantra or you see Katha Sarit Sagar, we we ascribe to a very circular sort of uh, storytelling, because that's the entire philosophy. We don't believe that a person begins his journey from birth and then ends at death. No, then it's again a circle. So that circular form of music also is now increasingly getting lost, because you are telling linear stories. So you are not telling, actually, the in 90s, if you see the films, the songs were just spaces of rest. In a David Dhawan film, the song had no bearing on the story. So it was just a 5 minute rest from the story. That's now, as stories went on to shifted to the Mofussil from centers of urban centers like Mumbai. Actually, what the shift was not just from urban centers. The shift was from generalization to the specific. So now we have a story set in Bareilly. Otherwise, there was some Ramgarh, which was a fictional town, and then they could take a lot of artistic liberty and speak any kind of language. So now they are zeroing in on which dialect the characters will speak. So the songs may come from that dialect. So that's I think a very welcome approach. But as Nivedita ji was saying that you know that taking the soul from Western type of storytelling and then infusing it into our small towns, and it sometimes it becomes so morose and so far away removed from reality that you develop sort of a it's something repels you from accepting that story. So that is what happens. So increasingly characters, stories, especially on OTT platforms, and for the precise reason that Nivedita ji gave, they started becoming more and more repulsive. So what is welcome is you take story to specific town. The more specific you are, the more universal you become. That is an essential truth of storytelling.
Yeah.
So, but if that is lost, and then you infuse the characters as if it's speaking in a say Avadhi dialect, but the character has nothing to do with the personality of an Avadhi fellow, then it again you are stuck in sort of a schizophrenic space, that you don't actually know what the character is talking about and who he is talking about. Secondly, whose stories are you telling? That becomes a very, now for example, I had almost written an article on films of Vishal Bharadwaj, because very interesting. I had named the article as "To Be or Not to Be Vishal Bharadwaj." The reason is, see, when you adapt, for example, and I think he did a very good job as far as the device is concerned of telling that story. But for example, take Othello or Omkara. Now Othello was a king. Okay, he was a righteous king. He had the sort of a a legal standpoint of ruling that country. Okay, and he's the perfect person. He's perfect in all other aspects. He is brave, he is courageous, he is loyal, he stands by his subjects, but he is not good looking, and he loves Desdemona, and that love turns into extreme possessiveness, that he starts not only doubting Desdemona, he starts doubting himself, and it leads to disaster, and that is a tragedy. But it remains, the truth remains that Othello was a king, and the power to vested in him was legitimate. Okay, now take Omkara. Omkara is a Bahubali's right hand man, or is a Bahubali himself. So the power vested in him itself is illegal, it's illegitimate. So he has other cracks in his personality already. So who cares whether he loves Dolly or he doesn't, or that those cracks are bound to show. That it does not become the story of a strong person. It does not become a story of a person whose story you would care to hear. The same thing about Maqbool. So any legitimate character turns illegitimate in Vishal Bharadwaj's film. So the dialogues are good, the storytelling is very nice, but who are you actually? The soul of that story is lost because Macbeth was a courageous man, and he was actually the right hand of the king. So the power vested in him was legitimate. Same thing, and it turned worse in Hyder. That slowly you started sympathizing with terror apologists and terrorists eventually. So it's bound to go in that way.
Yeah.
It's bound to go. It's sort of destined that what type of a story you will tell will become worse. And very interesting thing. In Maqbool, I don't remember in Omkar, I don't think it is there, but in Maqbool and in Hyder, there is one thing common. The character with whom the audience should sympathize sings Gulo Mein Rang Bhare, Faiz Ahmad Faiz poem. Gulo mein rang bhare, baade no bahar chale. This is the song that in Maqbool, the character of Pankaj Kapoor sings, who is murdered. So the audience feels for him, or should feel, that he was murdered, and he was murdered unfairly. Okay, the treatment meted out to him was unfair. Same thing in Hyder. The father of Hyder sings this song. So this is where Oscar Wilde says that to reveal art and conceal the artist, that is art saying. But this is where the filmmaker reveals himself, because that Gulo Mein Rang Bhare is not being sung by the characters, it's being sung by the filmmaker. That's his position. That's how you know that who he's sympathizing with. And it might have been done knowingly or unknowingly, who knows. But that is how storytelling has varied, even if it went to the specifics. So Hyder did go to Kashmir, Omkara did go to the heartland of UP, Maqbool did address the question of the Muslim gangsters or gangster families, but eventually what matters is whose story you tell and what is the value that you add once the film or the story is over. So that is the question that remains to be answered. So going to specific regions is most welcome, but are you telling the story of that region honestly is another important part that you have to see.
Right.
Is
So I think
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead,
no,
please.
please, Kaushal ji, please carry
no,
on.
just one line to end some of this, that you can give the language, the uh, uh, the sets, the art direction, the costumes of a particular character. But if that soul from that character is removed, or you try to infuse a foreign soul in that, then the story does not remain genuine. It remains very superficial, and it does not really tell you anything about, and it doesn't stay with you. That is also true.
And just to add to that, in Bharat Muni, who wrote the Natya Shastra, he talks about it. Even the kind of experimentation that happens, in Natya or any form of art, it looks for pramana in the lok, in the society. So as you said, that even when you are doing a kind of experimentation, you cannot not be true to the region or to the story or to the character. So you cannot be, if I could say, inauthentic. You cannot tell a story and try to push a certain agenda. The audience will see through it. And the beauty of the Indian tradition is, um, equal importance is given to the rasika, the one who partakes your work of art, the one who listens to you, the one who's, and if there is freedom given to the artist to sort of make any kind of art that you want, there is equal freedom given to the audience to interpret it and also react to it. So people will see through it, and people will tell you, or they'll call you out if you do that.
Right. So how much of this could be, creative liberty and, let's say, I mean, an adaptation as such, right? Or do you think that, there are certain rules and ethics to be followed even in such a case, of, let's say, adapting things and, maybe making a fusion of certain things, right? So again, this is a question to both of you. I think Nivedita ji, you can begin, and Kaushal ji, you can add.
So, again, because the last 2 years of my journey has been sort of a dip into the Indian tradition, I am the kind of worldview that I have, or I'm gaining, is there's a lot of unlearning that is also happening. So in our Alankarikas, creativity is something which is defined as something which is always novel, and it has no boundaries. But again, going back to the whole auchitya part of it, there is an inbuilt boundary in any work of art, and an artist respects that. So I think I would say the conscience of the artist should be able to answer that. There is, of course, experimentation that will happen, but the trend is to pass off provocation, to pass off, outrage or a certain kind of narrative as art. I think that's where I would draw a line. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
Right.
So, regarding this, I think creative liberty is inherent in an artist, but there is a difference between being creative, between creative liberty and being arbitrary. I'll tell you, you write the first line of a character, and the author actually the creative liberty diminishes with each line you write, because then the character takes on its own life, and then the character dictates what it should say. That is the difference between writing say an essay or even a story in third person to writing a film. In a film or in a play, it's the characters who should speak, not the author. Now what happens sometimes is all characters philosophize. How is that? Because the author is actually speaking in their language, from their mouths. So the creative liberty cannot be arbitrary, and it has to come with a great deal of responsibility. So when Kumar Gandharva actually puts the madhyam in Bhoop, he is doing it with a lot of responsibility, and also he has to see what is the उसका प्रमाण क्या है, how much is he doing it. So that sometimes creative liberties they attribute anything to creative liberty, and then it is only arbitrariness. So it's just being arbitrary, so you can't, but I'll tell you what, that makes it into a bad bad art. So I don't really have ethical problems with it. Yeah, because each to his own, and it usually it becomes bad art. So even when Bharat Muni was writing Natya Shastra, that's what he had to say. He is not defining your ethics, or this is not right, this is not correct. You do it, but you do it at your own peril, because the Rasik, as Nivedita ji said, they are going to call you out if it's going to be bad, and they will. Because see, there is a difference between a listener or a viewer and a Rasik. The time that a craftsman spends to become an artist, and that journey from a craftsman to an artist is actually it's a very tough journey. Okay, a journey from a viewer or an audience to a rasika is equally tough. So if you have to get the taste of honey, you have to put your hand into the honeycomb, and risk being bitten. So that is there equally true. That's equally true for the artist as well as the rasik. So when both these factors come from a place of responsibility, that there is a story to tell, and you have to listen to it, and you have to come to a certain level to understand it. So for example, maybe you go to a pub to have a drink, and you listen to the music that is being played there. There is no actually responsibility. Nobody expects you to know something about metal or rock music or anything. But if you go for a concert of classical music, then a minimum education is expected from the listener as well. So when the listener also comes from a position of responsibility, and the artist also comes from a position of responsibility, then the boundaries for creative liberty are well acknowledged. So they are well defined, that you cannot go beyond this and just say that this is creative liberty. Then that is arbitrariness.
Right. Fair point.
There are three things that I would like to add to it, Roshan, if we have time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to add to what Kaushal said, arbitrariness, and there is this trend to show the absurd. I mean, recently, I think there's this Italian artist, his name is Maurizio Catalano or something. So his installation is put in the Guggenheim Museum of Art, and there is a banana which is
Stuck.
there's a duct tape, stuck, stuck with a duct tape.
Yeah.
Now, would you call, and there was a performance artist who came there and he ate the banana. So, and there was a lot of, so what is the purpose of your art? What kind of meaning do you want to ascribe to it? And I'm sure there is but is the only purpose to create something so bizarre that you gain audience's attention? I mean, these are some of the questions that we need to answer about art. So I think it sells for around $150,000 US dollars, and the people who take that installation home, or whatever there is of it, I'm sure they don't take the banana home. They are given a certificate of authenticity, and then there is a manual on how to install that banana in a correct position. So the absurdism of it, and I understand that art also has to mirror what is going on in the world. Absurdism is a part of it, but what passes off as art cannot be that arbitrary. And Roger Scruton, there is a very beautiful documentary he made in 2009, and he made a impassioned case for beauty, why beauty matters. And he takes in the ideas of Plato and Kant, and he talks about how beauty has to come back to the center of our civilization. There is a trend to glorify ugliness. So I'm not saying that the ugly part of the world should not be shown with art, but that should not be the only purpose.
Right.
The second thing that Kaushalji talks about craft, and I think again in the Indian tradition. So there was art, there was craft, and then all of it had divine inspirations, right? So not everyone was an artist, and it was okay. It's not a sort of hierarchy. You are born with a certain sense of taste, but craft is something that you can learn. I think Malcolm Gladwell talks about it. If you learn something or work on something for 10,000 hours, you gain sort of mastery over it. So there used to be these schools of apprenticeship, right? A child or someone who wants to learn comes, learns under a master who knows that art. One of those pupils would have that streak of genius, and they would be elevated to the position of an artist. But even to be a craftsman, it was okay. It was okay, even if you were imitating something and doing it really well, you were adding or creating something for the society. But what has happened in the modern world, or the world that we have today, how can you call something that someone has created not art? You're being unfair, right? And especially with the advent of social media, Instagram, the kind of platforms people have, everything passes off as art, and that has become the norm. And if you are calling it out, or if you are judging, then it's politically incorrect. So all those points also have to be sort of kept in mind when it comes to creativity.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a much broader point. I mean, I don't know who said it. I think it was Douglas Murray who said it, that in the competing virtues, mercy seems to outrank justice in today's world, right? So which is why, I mean, you kind of see plenty of this across various different spheres. So Nivedita ji, another aspect that I wanted to talk about was specifically how dharma and Hinduism is represented in mainstream arts, right? Like cinema, for example. So what is your opinion of that? And if you could talk us through that as well.
So it's strange. Although I've been an actor, I haven't watched a lot of cinema, so I'm not sure if I will be able to do justice to that, because how do I comment on something if I have not seen enough number of movies or shows to sort of see that evolution or whatever? But as generally, like, I think at least when you think of regional cinema, at one point of time, Telugu, like Sagar Sangamam, etc., they were, and even Sitaram Shastri ji, when he writes lyrics, right, he infuses philosophy into everyday sort of songs. So at least in regional cinema, that had been happening. In Bollywood, Hindi cinema, representation of dharma, I'm not so sure. There's a lot of deracination that has happened. When it comes to television, you have shows like Ramayana and Mahabharata, and you have a lot of stories talking about our itihasa. But yeah, I think I'm ill-equipped to answer that question, I would say. Yeah.
Right. Kaushal ji, do you want to, I mean, would you have any comments on that, or we could move further?
No, we can move further.
Okay. So I had a question on the politicization. Sorry, go on, please.
I'm saying that if you actually look at Twitter, there is this Twitter handle, Gems of Bollywood, right? They have been they have been calling out the kind of sort of anti-Hindu narratives that our films, sometimes even films that we would not think of, have been sort of anti-Hindu, or
right.
They have been able to point that out. So I'm sure there has been that representation has been sort of, there's a lot of whitewashing that happens of history that happens through cinema. That also happens. But you have to look at the fact that the kind of people who made films in the 70s or 80s, there was also there was an institutionalized narrative that was, and I think that reflected on the kind of films that were made. So I think when it comes to representing dharma, our films have fallen short, I would say. Especially when you look at the kind of posts that Gems of Bollywood sort of does. Sometimes it just surprises me. Why did it miss me? What was I doing? I didn't see this, right? So yeah.
Yeah. somewhere between misrepresentation and misunderstanding, I suppose. Yeah, right. So, Kaushalji, I had a question on politicization of art. Considering that art is such a powerful medium, right? It can influence people, it can influence culture, so on and so forth.
Right.
Was art always political, or do you think that's a recent phenomenon?
It was always political. It was always political. We are a political, our whole existence is political. So art is, in fact, I had a very engaging conversation about this with Apurva Asrani on Twitter. And Apurva Asrani is the editor of Satya, the writer of films like Shahid, and also which was that film Aligarh. So very intelligent, and very few of engagements on Twitter are that civilized. So we had a really civil conversation about politics, and he said that art is not political, and I had maintained that art is political. See, any sort of even in music, even if you're not overtly being political, there is some sort of a political statement in each sort of art. There is some sort of an ideological position. It may not always be overtly political. It not always be very to your face sort of political statement, but there is, and it becomes increasingly. See, music is very sublime. So sometimes that streak of political statement cannot be even detected there, and sometimes it is not there also. But as you come to the other performing arts, and especially then you veer towards cinema and theater, then those are extremely political, always have been. And because it's a really effective medium to sort of test radical ideas, different ideas, sometimes revolutionary. So it has always been political, in my opinion. Art has always been political,
right?
Whether you want it or not, but it will be. It will be.
So yeah, please go ahead,
Roshan. So yeah, I mean, I would frame two questions out of this idea. Is art political, or should art be political? Now, there was this movement in the West, art for art's sake, and Kaushalji quoted Oscar Wilde earlier. So Oscar Wilde, in his preface to this book, Picture of Dorian Gray, and I'm going to quote him, he says that art shall have no other aim than bring art, and it should be protected from subordination to any moral, didactic, or political purpose. So that is something that happened in the West. So should art be political? My personal position is it shouldn't be. Art always indicates, and the moral didactic position of the artist should not. It's not something that it never. It indicates, it never directs, or at least that's how I think art should be. Art should only worry about auchitya, not politics. And I think politicization of art is also something which is recent. When I say recent, with the whole Marxism and communism, when that came, this whole socialist realism and art, even the concept of artistic or creative liberty also came because there was a clampdown on artists during the communist regime, and there was a certain kind of worldview that people wanted to portray. There was this whole utopian socialist idea that they wanted to convey through art. It's a different matter that it was never reached. So I think this politicization of art and then institutionalization of that political art is something that happened in the last, I would say, 40 years. To me, art is something that is not political. It's something that appeals to that part of me as an individual that wants to transcend. And that's what a great work of art is.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've seen social media sort of amplify this further, right? I mean, you could, I mean, some may call it virtue signaling, some may call it activism, so on and so forth. Repeatedly, we find that artists stand for or against something very visibly, right? And they channel their art as well. So, what do you think about that?
I think the virtue signaling is also happening because a lot of artists are on social media now. So people are able to see. Oh, do you mean like artists virtue signaling or taking a moral position and wanting people, or do you mean the audience sort of calling out or just outraging?
I
What was
guess
the
I
question?
I guess both. I mean, the former because I mean, you find a lot of them standing up for something, right? I mean, it could be some the environment, or it could be the CAA, for example, and so on and so forth, right? So they seem to take a position on these things.
Hmm.
So your comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's because with the social media, people have a voice. They feel they can reach a larger section of people, and because now art has become political, so yeah, it's the easiest way to make a statement. And the other thing also is um, the fact that liberalism with a capital L, this whole ideology, right? Um, it has usurped compassion, justice, kindness, these terms, right? And these are human values that we all want to sort of have, right? So this kind of virtue signaling happens. They have usurped it, and then they morally point out to others that they point out that virtue signaling happens, that the rest of the people are not sort of living up to this standard of. So I was having a conversation with actually someone, and they said this kind of ideology of filmmakers or artists or musicians, etc. They think that हम कुछ भी करें, हम हमेशा liberal रहेंगे, we'll always be liberal. You, whatever you may do, irrespective of what you do, you'll never be a liberal. So liberal, this term has been made sort of aspirational, and it's been put on a pedestal, right? And there are people who have usurped this term, and therefore the kind of virtue signaling you see that is happening through on social media. But yeah, so
Right.
that's what I would want to say. Yeah.
The
Kaushalji,
bone.
your
Yeah.
yeah, I was going to come to you on the same matter. I mean, your comments on that. We do see that artists, or in general, they tend to skew more towards the liberal left side of things,
Yeah.
right? Is it because of a certain wiring? I mean, what I could guess is that you have to push the boundaries, you have to be experimentative in that sense, and you have to challenge certain conventions. And is that the reason why, I mean, they tend to skew that way, or is it something else?
Yeah, you have got a point. Actually, see, I have a theory about this. Uh, you know, the position of the left in a society is to actually give voice to the underprivileged. That's how it should be. That's how it is. It is supposed to be. Okay. Now, what happens is there are two aspects to this. First thing is, let's see the difference between, say, a baker and a musician, okay, or a music composer like me. So what does the baker have to do? He has to go to his bakery every day, and he has to make the same kind of cookie or a biscuit that he did yesterday. So he has to maintain that quality and that same taste. Okay. So the whole point about his existence is that he has to do the exact thing that he did yesterday. Okay, in the exact same manner. An artist, this is the precise thing that I don't have to do, or I shouldn't be doing. So I am going to do a different song, and I should not be doing what I did yesterday. So what happens here is that you're constantly, as you said, the whole thing is to keep a flux, keep changing. So conservatism does not naturally come to an artist. Now what happens, there is another angle to this. Post independence, as Nivedita ji rightly said, the terms liberalism, compassion, kindness, even love these days, they are usurped by the left, as if they, whatever they do, that's going to be most, the the most hateful statements by the left are given in the name of love.
Right.
So now what happens is that you see in a art or any kind of theater or music, it's not considered to be one of the necessities of modern life. That was not true in our ancient traditions.
Yes.
It was very much part of life. It was essential. Now what, I'll give you one example. So what do they say? That bhuke pet hum, you can't sing on an empty
Bhajan.
stomach.
Yeah.
Okay, right, bhajan nahi ga sakte.
Okay, bhajan na hoy Gopala.
Ha. Is it really true? You see, most of the artists, they have not come from very you know uh, very affluent families or anything, except perhaps for Rabindranath Tagore or any some person like that. So it's not really connected. It's not connected whether you can think of songs only on the best songs have come from maybe from an empty stomach. In fact, the left should be the last people who should be talking about this, because all their songs are about hunger. All their poetry is about not getting the rights. So actually, but then they will say, no, this is not art. This is a medium. So they have turned art into some sort of a cheap medium to convey an ideology. Okay, but it's not, art is not a medium to voice an ideology. That is not the purpose of art. Like, and Nivedita ji quoted from the preface of Dorian Gray.
Dorian.
That the line I quoted first was from the same preface. It's the first line, I think, to reveal art and conceal the artist. That is art. Now, what has happened is that when you usurp such things like such this language, and you it in a way, this is linguistic imperialism, that you know anything about compassion and the right does not have any right to talk about it, or they are lying because they are the right. So that's a total logical fallacy, and it's linguistic imperialism that these terms belong to us. Actually, the left are the zamindars and the thakurs of language, and increasingly this linguistic territory they are usurping as if that's their own. So what happens is that artists, they tend to no, I am compassionate, because compassion is one of the fuels of an artist.
Yes.
An artist cannot go ahead without compassion, without empathy. There cannot be any art without any empathy. There cannot be any art without any compassion. So then you have to be on this side. Secondly, see, a right conservative government says we have nothing to do with art. We'll build infrastructure. And that is where the right has been going wrong consistently. Now, your aim is not just to call out Even on Twitter, if you see, the right is just calling out the left. What has changed in these last 8 years is that the agenda is slowly being set by somebody from the right. Okay, so now the left has to call out. But so far, from 47 to 2014, what was happening was that people are calling, and it still happens because you are wired, like you said. Now the artists veer towards what, if there is a right conservative government, they say that, especially I am talking about the economic right, okay, not the cultural right. Economical right government says that we'll spend on infrastructure, but we won't spend on art. So anything that is not made for the markets, what will happen to those people? They will either depend on certain strong influential patrons, or they will depend on the government. If there is a socialist government in the center and they are giving doles to artists that, okay, you do this and we'll give you some grants and we'll give you, so the artists feel that this is free. Okay, but actually for 70 years that's not happening. What is the price the artist has to pay is that you have to sort of validate the ideological position of that government.
Yes.
That is the price the artist has to pay. So you see, from 47 to 2014, the central position of the central parties in India especially has been pop socialism. And that is what artists have to endorse, because that's the price that they are paying. While at the whole time thinking that this is either free of cost, or this is something, that we deserve. But there are no free lunches. So when the time comes, you have to endorse that position, and then you become so sort of programmed into it that you don't begin to think that there can be some other side, and there is a bigger picture, there is a larger picture, and I don't have to constantly fit on one ideological position, and that is not art. And if there is something, see, who is the most intolerant today? Where did the cancel culture originate? Who says that don't speak this, don't speak that, if you speak this, then you are not compassionate at all, if you speak this, you don't deserve to get a platform? So who started this deplatforming culture? It was not the right. It was never the right.
Yeah.
The right was not in the right place to do it. It came from the left. And then that is a very bad place for an artist to be in. That's a very bad place. And slowly you start becoming mouthpieces for ideology, and that is not what an artist should do. An artist should remain free, not arbitrary. He should remain, he or she, they should remain independent of the state, of any ideology, and even of popular sort of popular beliefs. So if somebody has to say something against popular belief, there should be space in the society to say that. The left can never give that space. I'm telling you, that's how actually I have been groomed by people who are to the left of the ideology. Okay, this epiphany came to me slowly after starting to read a lot and experiencing things, and when I wanted to take some sort of a position which was not ratified by the so-called left, then I understood that if I have to say these things, then I'll have to ratify their ideology and I won't be free to say my own thing. And to an artist, that should remain of prime importance.
Right.
Yeah.
It's also, yeah, sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no. I think because Kaushal mentioned a very important point, and I think it's important to add here the role of state. And I think so the priming or the wiring is institutionalized, as I mentioned earlier. So you had the film school or the kind of people who went there. Then you had the Progressive Writers Association, or so that generation of people is maturing now, and they are influenced, and now they have an avenue, and they talk about it, and they virtue signal and influence people. So traditionally the role of state was very, very well defined. It did not interfere in art. The role of state was external defense, or in case of a calamity, it took social and civic responsibility. Or if there was a rogue corporate monopolizing something, then the state would intervene. So in a traditional Indian society, the role of the state, they did not, the king did not make laws, right? So, but here, what happened after independence was that a certain ideology, through education, through the film schools, through arts, there was a certain kind of narrative that was perpetuated, right? And the virtue signaling that you see now, the wiring that I actually don't even blame these people. If you grow up learning or listening to certain things, you internalize it, right? And then it's also very difficult if you're surrounded by those people. It's very difficult for you to break that boundary, because maybe your work depends on it, or you probably don't even realize it. A lot of us, I studied in a I studied in a university, in a college, and I studied literature, English literature, the liberal arts influence. I learned a lot. So there are positives of it as well. It broadens your horizon. But you see, you're constantly bombarded with a certain kind of ideology, and it's very, very difficult to unlearn or to come out of it. As Kaushal ji mentioned, over a period of time, when you start reading, or you listen, or you meet other kind of people, so that's when sort of, I don't know, dewiring is a term, but sort of your whatever you have internalized, you start breaking those, and you start unlearning, and then learning new things. It's very, very important to change the lens. I don't know how that's going to happen, but we have to start looking at our world through our own lens.
Right.
Like you said, they are putting in 10,000 hours of prejudice. like Gladwell says, they are putting in 10,000 hours of prejudice, and then you become an expert in prejudice. So that's
it's been honed really well.
Yeah.
Right. So Kaushalji, I mean, in music especially, practically 100% of the Bollywood singers up until recently were of the opposite persuasion, right? I mean, whether it's Lataji or Kishorda and so on. How did they sort of survive? How did they kind of stay true to their art as such, and or were they able to separate both these worlds? And how do you think that happened?
No. See, music, I'll tell you what happens. In theater, and a theater artist or a film maker and a musician, there is one very fundamental difference in thought. A filmmaker will always try to say break the glass ceiling, or push the boundaries socially. In music, we are brought up in an environment of reverence. So you take Ram Gopal Verma, his whole strength as a filmmaker is being irreverent. He's irreverent. The good work that he has done has come out of being irreverent, thinking differently. In music, the whole thing is that you are taught to be reverent. And that reverence is shown. You see the musicians approaching the stage, and you see, say, for example, filmmakers or actors approaching a film shoot. you'll see the difference is in the kind of reverence they show to even to the audience, you know. So that because music is in such, so that conservative values of respecting the elders, uh, then to learn from any guru. So till now, Guru Shishya Parampara is still very much alive in music, for example. So that my Guruji learned from his Guruji, who was Kumar Gandharva. So my Guruji Satyashil Deshpande, he learned from him in a Guru Shishya Parampara sort of a way. He went to Devas and he stayed with him and learned. So this is still recent times. So that reverence, that fundamental difference in the quality of reverence, let's say, it's not there that there is no reverence in theater, or but it's the quality of reverence differs. So that's one reason why musicians. Also, there is one thing. Alfred North Whitehead said that logic is the soul of wit and not wisdom, and that is why wit is so funny. So there is a world beyond logic, which I think a musician understands it internally better than most artists from other streams. That so this Aristotelian logic sometimes can break down very easily, and most of the leftist literature, and even if you read Marx, so there is the whole establishment, or the whole structure of the argument is based on a premise that cannot be proved. So it has to be an axiom. So once you turn that axiom the other way around, then there is no structure. That is the problem with any kind of logic. Now, when you start looking at things from a different lens other than just logic, or just Aristotelian logic, that this must be the only truth. Why should there be a different word for truth other than fact? That is the reason, because truth has something else in it. It has value, and value cannot be looked at from the lens of science or logic alone. It has to be looked from 360 degrees. There has to be experience, there has to be and experience can be of multiple types. So the singers which you are talking about, they were raised in this sort of an atmosphere. So they come to that conservative side of looking at things eventually, or they are wired to do so. They are groomed in that manner. Leftists are radicals, so they constantly want change. Now a musician, for him, the change is not the essential factor at all. He knows that his classic problem is economic, actually, that there are 12 notes, and in that 12 notes he has to create the world. However gifted you are, there is not going to be a 13th note there. So he knows that this is the world that I have to be in. So this is a very internal framing of your logic. So I have to create whatever I have to do in these 12 notes. So that urge to be radical just disappears actually when you look at music in a certain way. So there will be people who are radical, who are musicians too. It's not that they won't be, but most part of the time, this is what happens, that there is no need to be radical, and that wisdom is there internally with musicians. So they don't
Yeah.
veer much to the left as much as these theater artists or filmmakers do.
Right. Very interesting. Yeah. Now that you mention
It's
it, I
yeah,
mean,
it's
yeah. Go ahead, please.
no, Russian, please. I'll speak after you.
No. I mean, now that you mention it, I mean, it's very easy to tell in music when it's upper swara, right? I mean, where something is off. I don't
Yeah.
know if it's equally easy to do that in other forms of art. I mean, it could just be my bias as an amateur musician. I don't know. So, yeah. Sorry, you were saying, Nivedita ji.
Kaushal ji actually talks about a very important point, and Shraddha, reverence, right? And the kind of qualities that it gives you. So that respect for tradition, I don't know if it is because of owing to this medium of expression that music or singing is, but Shraddha plays a very, very important role. And this takes me to, I'm going to diverge a little um, to working on yourself as an individual to make a difference, or blaming the system. So this is the difference between a a right-based society and a duty-based society. And I'm going to make that point because it gave me an opportunity to make this point. Because in a duty-based society, the emphasis is on the individual. It's meditation versus revolution, I could you could say, right? The emphasis is on the individual to make sure that there's a constant improvement that is happening at the individual level. In a rights-based society, hum duniya badal denge, revolution aa jayega, wo karenge, system is constantly blamed. Whereas if you look at it, if an individual uh, works towards self improvement every day, that improvement or that difference accrues to on a social level as well, and the society also changes in itself. So the reason I'm making this point is because that this comes from shraddha, or the humility that has been a part of this tradition. And I think musicians, singers, that as Kaushal ji also mentioned, they're still respectful towards tradition.
Hmm. Right. So, Kaushalji also mentioned patronage, right? Patronage of arts, and that kind of influences what you put out as artists. So, Nivedita ji, we live in this creator economy, right? So, you don't really have to go through labels to reach your audience per se. I mean, you can go direct to audience. Similarly, the advent of social media, so on and so forth. So, we're seeing a lot of artists, being very enterprising and innovative on that front. Has that really freed the expression of an artist, or do you think that it has imposed some other constraints on the art itself?
Hmm. I think on the one hand, it has, right? You can, what you considered your idea of art, you're able to put that out to the world, and there is a medium to it. There's a free medium, right? But on the other hand, the medium itself poses certain restrictions. So Instagram has its own rules, or Twitter will have its own rules, or Snapchat will have its own rules. I'm sorry, I sometimes feel I'm so primitive because I'm not even aware of if there are any other new media that I need to be talking about. But Instagram primarily, right? People put out photographs and videos, etc. So yeah, the medium itself poses certain restrictions. But other than that, I feel there is this whole generation of Instagram poets, Instagram artists that are coming up, right? So yeah, it has sort of, in that sense, democratized
Art. Yeah.
this, yeah,
Right.
art.
Kaushalji, do you think that has made a difference as such? I mean, the fact that, if you're a young artist today, you could build a following on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and not really have to go through a record label and so on. I mean, it has, right? I mean, it's made a huge difference.
Yeah, it has made a huge difference, and it will come up with its own challenges.
Hmm.
An individual is as effective or as ineffective as he or she was before this era, and it continues to remain so. See, what happens in democratization is everybody gets used, everybody is gets the opportunity to use the medium, but it's like when finally the monsoon comes, if the flowering trees grow, even the congress grass grows. So
Right.
now it's difficult to tell from uh,
Noise.
all the noise where exactly the music is. So it's again, it becomes difficult. Secondly, today, in today's times, we are faced with, if you are effective, then does the big tech endorse your position or no? And then you have actually given your democracy in their hands. So this is not, I'm not going far. Today's story, Scott Adams' YouTube account, not the account, but some of his videos were thrown out by YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, or deleted by YouTube. Now this is creator of Dilbert that we are talking about. Okay, so he is an artist. Now YouTube will decide whether this, what Scott Adams speaks is right or wrong, or whether it's in public interest or no, whether it is scam or spam or no. They will decide. So there are booby traps in every system.
So you have a new set of gatekeepers, basically.
You have new set of gatekeepers. Yeah. Now the whole debate is now whether YouTube is actually just a platform or is it a publisher. Same with Twitter, with all this shadow banning and pointing to, now they can't delete Trump's tweets, or they can't really delete his account while he's still the president, but they will do it. You hear it. So these platforms, these so-called democratic platforms, will come with their own booby traps, and so there is no alternative to being alert. You have to be alert about what you are speaking, in what language, in how you are doing it. So in Marathi, there is a play called Kichakvad, written by Khadilkar. Okay. Now it tells the classic story of Mahabharat, where Sairandhri's, Kichak attempts to molest Sairandhri, that is Draupadi, and Bhim kills him. Okay. So when Khadilkar wrote that play, he used those characters of Mahabharat as, say, archetypes. That Kichak was actually the British Empire. Sairandhri was actually India. So he did it in such a way that it took time for the British to know that this actually is a play against us. So now we have to use the same ploys. You have to be very alert as to how you are presenting your idea. If you are presenting something which is maybe politically explosive or politically incorrect, so it's very, and the patronage, that's the whole point. There is more visibility, but patronage goes to only things which are very masses friendly. So say, for example, classical art forms like classical dance, for example, Bharatnatyam is still, they still have the problems of patronage. For example, in Mumbai, till around 30 years ago, we used to have a classical dance review in the Times of India. We don't have it anymore. So as if there is nobody who's doing Bharatanatyam. That's what. So who who is in charge? And that, I think that was a major failure of our journalism,
Mm.
that it gave a, it gave a constant platform to mediocrity. And this is why we have come here. Why should an artist have to think about how he's going to present herself to the people, when actually the society must be taking care of that job? Now the only way to do it is
Mm.
to keep educating the audience, keep cultivating your audience to whatever type of art form you have. So for example, music, apart from films, okay, non-film music, there was such a demand for it, for non-film music 20-25 years ago. And today you see these indie bands or anything, they are still struggling. So that struggle never stops.
Mm.
So whatever type of music that you're doing, or whatever type of art that you're doing, apart from doing that art, your constant other job is to cultivate that audience, so that you cultivate a patronage for not only yourself,
Mm.
but post your era also, people continue to patronize that form of art. So that's the responsibility now of the artist.
Right.
Kaushalji, the thing also is, as you mentioned, the other limitation or the restriction that there is when there is technology driven consumption of art, and entertainment, there is also creation of micro identities, and that is happening. The big tech sort of controls and primes people in what they should be watching, and
Mm.
that also defines the content that is being created. I think that is
That's true.
something we must be wary of.
Yeah.
Right.
And purely as an artist, someone who's also, what if I just want to act and I don't want, I don't want to post my pictures on, say, Instagram, but that is a work hazard now, right? If I don't go
Absolutely.
out there, constantly put myself out there to people, people will not know. And so how do some artists don't like that, but if you don't do that, then no one will watch you. So there is
Mm.
always that dilemma, right? And yeah, that makes me uncomfortable as an artist, I would say.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Right.
what most of the artists are going through. Right.
Right. So do you think that the monetization aspects for artists has improved? I mean, the avenues have improved. I mean, certainly it seems so, right? I mean, you have streaming, you have direct to audience, all of these channels that we spoke about and stuff like that. Like, I mean, people could set up Patreon pages, so on and so forth. Do you think that monetization aspects have improved?
They have, considering that everything is based on mass consumption.
Hmm.
Now, what will happen to the niche arts? That is that is something that,
Right.
so
Also, I think it skews more towards performance than art. I think.
yeah, yeah. See, it's always been the case that the your society gives more importance to that art that you see being performed or being created in front of you. So that's why people know the names of singers, but they don't know the names of the lyricists and the music composers.
Hmm.
Even the RJs on radio shows, they say that this is a song by Arijit Singh, but rarely will they say that this is a song by Swanand Kirkire.
Hmm.
So they don't say who has written the song. Ours, you don't know. Most people don't know. If I say name any three sculptors in India, most people won't know because it's not seen in front of your own eyes, and that is some sort of sensitivity that you will have to cultivate, and there is no shortcut that, and we have lost a good time We have lost a lot of time. This should have been done, and it's there in our traditions.
Yeah.
But if you decide to cut off yourself from tradition, and then I'll make a new world, everybody thinks that I'm going to make a new world tomorrow. Now, this I'm going to build a new world. I'm going to build a brave new world. So actually, this leftist point of view is quite delusional, actually. So, and they constantly want to reinvent a wheel, and
Right.
at least they don't even want to take that responsibility. They just want to show that we can reinvent the wheel, and they will show you pictures and all, and don't do anything at all. When there is such a lot of uh, collective wisdom in our tradition,
Mm.
constantly to demonize it and say that this is Brahminical, or create words which. So I'll give you an example. I had a dialogue with on Twitter. Okay, I had posted some I think whether it was Bhimsen Joshi or Kumar Gandharva or somebody, Kumar Gandharva only, I think. So I said that this you should listen to this. So some Dalit activist, or the Twitter activist, we'll say. I don't think he was even an activist, because it was an anonymous profile. And I said, this is your Brahminical art. I said, what are you talking about? What Brahminical art? You see all the people who created the gharanas, Abdul Karim Khan sahib, Kirana Gharana, then Alladiya Khan sahib, Jaipur Gharana, Fayyaz Khan sahib, Agra Gharana. So I said, where did you find Brahmins and Brahminical culture in this? The problem is that if you keep on giving this sort of radical leftist lenses to every art and everything you see, what happens ultimately is that you refuse to be educated, and you lose out on such big things. I said, it's your loss.
Yeah.
I will always listen to folk songs by, say, Vaman Dada Kardak, who was an Ambedkarite, and uh, I don't close my doors to it, because I know it's music of some value there. Okay, but then why are you doing this? Because it's I may not have anything to lose there. You have something to lose, because you will just keep on, and that's how they have been pushing people away from something that is already done so beautifully, and you can grow on it.
Mm.
Actually, the whole point is that challenges keep on coming, but whether I should upgrade my challenge or no, that is the question. So I am still trying to get people to be convinced that if if I am going to sing, say, classical music, then this is a good form of music, whereas it should grow. And there is no, this people talk on Twitter, especially on how leftists have interfered with our history and
Mm.
textbooks. But the damage is beyond that. The damage they are causing, or they have caused, is to the total cultural identity of India. So
Mm.
they start sort of distorting even music, which any musician will say that there is absolutely no chance that you can distort music, but they have been successful in doing even that.
Mm. Right.
You know,
So, yeah, go ahead,
yeah,
please.
Roger, the I somehow managed to interrupt you each time.
No, I understand. It's okay.
Yeah. So monetization depends on viewership, right? Um, the more number of viewers you can get, the more money a platform would make. will pay you if you look at the new media that is emerging.
Hmm.
So now the trend has been that the kind of, if a content is polarizing, or if it engages the baser instincts, I would say, I don't know, I don't have a better term, something which is very, you know, yeah, it's provocative and polarizing. That's so, because now I'm a part of editor of this channel, so therefore I have to look at what kind of views some of the videos are getting, right? And then I also have to sort of read and study what kind of videos get views on social media. So then that also creates another kind of problem, right? Then the content is, people have also forced, artists or content makers, creators are forced to make a certain kind of content. So this whole monetization is also of it, and making money out of it has also created another sort of problem. And I think it was important to point that out as well.
Right. No, that's an important point, I think. Okay, we've discussed various nuances and of how our culture is portrayed, in the various arts and so on and so forth, right? So, how do you think we should correct this narrative? I don't want to call it narrative, but how do you think we should correct this representation and sensitize artists and creators into producing quality art that reflects the truth of our culture in that sense? I mean, there's a question to both of you again.
Yeah. Kaushalji, do you want to take it, or shall
No,
I?
no, please do.
So since state is already playing a part, it should not have, but since state is already involved in this, right? So it has to happen at two levels. The state has to do something, and then there'll be society generated art that is going to be created or patronized. There's a lot of funding. There are a lot of these NGOs. There are a lot of these foreign players that act, and an individual or an organization can do nothing. Only the state, or they cannot make a huge change. When the state has to come into action in order to make sure that that kind of, I would say, just one point of view does not get told, right? And there are avenues for the dharmic side. There are places for the dharmic side, for the dharmic narrative to come forward. And then the second is the society generated, and I think that will be taken care of once the education system. Where is our dharmic education? Where is it, right? तो आप पहले धार्मिक education तो दे लोगों में. So this is how it happens. It first comes to polity, then it comes to society, then it comes to philosophy, and that philosophy is taken to people through art. So we still have a long way to go. So the only way for it to reflect in art is when the state and the society both work together. And the beginning of it would be to radically change the education system, not to feel inferior, the kind of demonization that happens of the Hindu culture, the Indic culture, that has to go away. The mental colonization that has happened over the years, that has to go away. The deracination that has happened over the years, that has to go away. And the starting point would be the education system, and state has definitely a role to play. And then we'll see it being reflected in the art that we consume.
Right. Kaushalji, your comments on this, and also specifically on how we can make some of this more relevant to the youth, actually.
I will agree 100% with Nivedita ji, as that education is the starting point of this process. Two things that we have ignored in our education system, apart from what she said, is the need for articulation and aesthetics. So if these two subjects are given proper representation in our education system, and then perhaps we might see a change in another 10 years. The term modern has often been conflated with the term Western, and you have to now have people who are actually investigating into the into the idiom of modernity, but through the path of Indianness. So there has to be some Indian version of being modern, right? So that has not happened. So what the problem even in with people from the Indic side has been that they have been constantly looking at the past. So there has to be some plan for the future. For example, I'll tell you, you look at whatever uh, Indic, whatever films that have been representing Indic culture. They have the stories are all set in the past, most of them.
Mm.
Okay, so Bahubali was one such film, and we have to make such films. So these films have to be made. Apart from that, you have to uh, investigate into the nature of modernity through the Indic lens. And then perhaps if 10 such different uh, artists in different media start doing that, then you can say that that there is some contribution from our side. It's secondly, it's going to be a long process. It's not an overnight process at all. You have to invest in this, and that is why I agree with Nivedita ji when otherwise the state should not have had a role to play in this, but now it has become imperative that the state starts encouraging a different kind of lens to see the arts from. I have been teaching music appreciation in FTII, and I have seen that the students who come also, that they have been groomed to see the world in very woke terms, or in, so but it makes it so we have to realize that anything you have to do, you have to know the tradition. If Because otherwise we will be just creating, just because of our our in our say just what do you say,
Passion to
excitement to do
innovate.
something new.
Mm.
You forget to do that which is good. And it's you know a very wise old literature in Marathi, he gave me a good piece of advice, very sound piece of advice, when he said, he asked me, so what are you planning to do? And I, like any young artist, I said I want to do something different. So he told me, do something that is good, different will happen. So what is good? So there are many definitions and many types of, and we have been totally ignoring our traditions in this. If you want to do something different, the only thing you will do is a pond. But if you know where the flow starts, then you will have that, you will get to be part of the river. So that is of some value, and that just stagnant water is of no value. So you have to, there is no alternative but to look at tradition and then move ahead. But if you decide to demonize that tradition, if you decide to be sorry about it, to feel guilt about it, then it's going to be extremely difficult for the next generation. It will be rootless, and that's a danger in terms of not just art and culture. It's very dangerous in terms of even the polity of how people will think about politics, how they will think about statehood, nationhood, how they will think about themselves as sovereign, independent people. It's going to this is going to have a very long lasting effect in many different things. So art and culture are extremely, they are like they have the same potential as a nuclear bomb. They are not meant to be taken lightly at all. That is what I want to say.
Right.
And the kind of cultural sort of revivalism that we are talking about, how we want to reclaim our culture, it cannot happen without looking at dharma, kama, moksha. Everything is, the basis is dharma, and art is in our tradition, art को अलग से नहीं देखा गया है. Art is not secular. And dharma, when we say dharma, we don't mean religion. We are talking about that which upholds. So we have to also reclaim and redefine these terms, and that can only happen through education. So I think, yeah, dharmic education, I would say.
Fantastic. Wow. So we've covered so many different aspects to the topic, and I could go on, but I'm pretty mindful of time. I know that we've taken almost 2 times the amount of time we had scheduled. This was a fascinating conversation. I mean, well worth the wait for us to have scheduled it at this time. Considering the both of you are fantastic singers, musicians, it would be remiss not to ask you for a few lines for our audience. If Nivedita ji, maybe you could sing a couple of lines, and then later Kaushal ji, you could indulge us as well.
I'm really afraid to sing in front of Kaushal ji, to be honest.
No. I've heard. I follow you on Twitter, so I hear your songs, and I'm really a fan. Please go ahead.
So I'm not a trained singer, and I'm sorry to the audience and to you if I make mistakes. But this is a song that I learned, and it's something which is close to me because I learned it from an artist from Kashi, and it reminds me of Banaras. I've already posted a video of it on Twitter, but I'll just sing a couple of lines. तरसत जियरा हमार नैहर बिना, तरसत जियरा हमार नैहर बिना, नैहर बिना, बाबा हठ कीनी गवनवा नदीनी, बाबा हठ कीनी गवनवा नदीनी, बीत गइल बरखा बहार नैहर बिना, तरसत जियरा हम.
Wow.
Thank you.
Super.
Very nice.
Kaushal ji.
Oh, okay. So you can look up this song on YouTube afterwards. But this is a song called Marathi Abhiman Geet. It's in Marathi, and there is a story to why this song was composed. I won't go into it, just in one line. In 2008, I was told by a radio jockey in a private FM station of Mumbai that we don't play Marathi songs because then it will seem that our radio station is down market. So I said, you don't play Marathi songs in the capital of Maharashtra. So, like, you present any problem to a musician, like caterpillar will turn into a butterfly, that problem turns into a song in the hands of a musician. So that's what happened in this case. So I said, I'll make the biggest song in the world, which is in Marathi and about Marathi. So this is a song not for people whose mother tongue is Marathi, but all people, those who have a mother tongue. Okay.
Right.
And the final version has been sung by 450 singers.
Wow.
You can look it up on YouTube. लाभले आम्हास भाग्य बोलतो मराठी, लाभले आम्हास भाग्य बोलतो मराठी, जाहलो खरेच धन्य ऐकतो मराठी, धर्म पंथ सात एक जाणतो मराठी, एवढ्या जगात माय मानतो मराठी, बोलतो मराठी ऐकतो मराठी, जाणतो मराठी मानतो मराठी. येथल्या नभामधून वर्षते मराठी, येथल्या पिकांमधून डोलते मराठी, येथल्या नद्यांमधून वाहते मराठी, येथल्या चराचरात राहते मराठी. लाभले आम्हास भाग्य बोलतो मराठी, जाहलो खरेच धन्य ऐकतो मराठी, बोलतो मराठी ऐकतो मराठी, जाणतो मराठी मानतो मराठी.
Wow, beautiful. Awesome. So on that very beautiful note, we'll end the podcast. Thank you so much, Nivedita ji. Thank you so much, Kaushal ji, for joining us. This was one of the best conversations I've had all of this year, and we've recorded plenty of good ones. So thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by the team at Bharatvaarta. If you liked this podcast, then don't forget to share, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite platforms. We're available on Anchor, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Breaker, YouTube, and a host of other platforms. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you do wish to offer us any feedback on the content or anything else, do reach out to us on social media or get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvaarta.in. The links are in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.